Hello, fellow members of the Autonomous Collective. How are we doing today? um, I mentioned in a post that I wanted to do, or was debating on whether or not to do a video about a quote from Game of Thrones, the TV series, and from A Clash of Kings, the book by George R.R. Martin. And some of the comments said something like, you might lose a couple of subscribers, but go for it. Another one was like, yeah, go for it while you still can. And the reasons I had been debating on whether or not to do that is because whenever you mention anything political, it opens you up to attack. And also, not just verbal attack, but it can have consequences that ripple through your real life, and I have to think about the longevity of my employment and all that. So that was my major considerations. So if you want to unsubscribe, smash that unsubscribe button. You know what to do. So anyway, the quote in question is, actually have had like several quotes and song lyrics kind of circulating through my head the last few months, but the quote that I mentioned is Tyrion and Varys are having a conversation, and Varys says, "Power resides where men believe it resides, no more and no less." So power is a mummer's trick, a shadow on the wall. Yet shadows can kill, and oftentimes a very small man can cast a very large shadow. So the part that I've been thinking about the most, I guess, is power resides where men believe it resides, because I've never really just accepted authority blindly. I've never really held someone in higher regard than other humans just because of a title or an office or anything like that. So, that, kind of as a symbol of power. And so I don't officially recognize that power just because somebody says it's so, I am kind of like a Monty Python skit. And, I think to myself, as, King Arthur charges through announcing himself King of the Britons, well, I didn't vote for you. That's really how I am. And, all that whole scene is brilliant, and it's so funny and well written. But I've read that autistic people struggle, or sometimes I wouldn't call that a struggle, really. We don't tend to recognize authority just because someone says so. And I've read different reasons for that. There's, the whole persistent drive for autonomy. There's theory of mind. Those kinds of things are stated as explanations for it. And, I always need to have reasons behind something. I need to have good, solid reasons with good, solid evidence. So, if someone's just, I'm in charge, you need to respect me and treat me like an authority just because I'm in charge. I want to know all about their credentials and what, makes them a better person to lead and all of that. And so, I've been back and forth. Another quote that's been hounding me, I don't mean back and forth on the political spectrum. I just mean back and forth with, is there any point to this? Like, is there any point? Because I have no hope. I knew how things were going to go. So, I'm just like, well, what's the point in even going when in my state I'm in, a very, small minority. So why even show up to vote? And so my conscience is the reason for that, because if there's anything at all that I can do to help preserve human rights, that's what I want to do. I don't think that there's any candidate out there who really I would agree with 100%. And it seems like the things that I find important, like climate change, I think is kind of the most important thing, because you need to have a livable planet in order to even have a government in the first place. But it seems like that was really hardly even mentioned. I've had people hounding me saying, you got to vote for the lesser of two evils. You got to vote for the lesser of two evils. And I've been hearing that phrase since I was a kid. And my mom was quoting someone saying that from when she was a kid. So how long have we been saying that? And when do we finally get to vote for the greater of two goods instead of the lesser of two evils? And I'm thinking about this quote from The Last Wish by Andrej Sapkowski. It's one of the Witcher books. And you may recognize it from the Witcher series. It's a little different, but evil is evil. Lesser, greater, middling, it's all the same. Proportions are negotiated, boundaries blurred. I'm not a pious hermit. I haven't only done good in my life, but if I'm to choose between one evil and another, I prefer not to choose at all. And so, that was my thinking for most of the year. But, when it becomes really obvious who the monster is in the situation, then my Witcher instincts kick in. And, I have a strong sense of justice. And I think most people have a sense of justice. We just don't all agree on what justice is. And another thing that Varys says in A Game of Thrones is that there's nothing more terrifying than a truly just man, because we've all made mistakes, but we haven't all made mistakes to the degree that the person who's been chosen has made. So it's been weighing on my mind, and since I don't really recognize authority just for the authority's sake, and I don't just respect someone because someone says I have to, I don't recognize that person's authority over me. At the same time, I'm not running around trying to do anything illegal. I just want to continue my way of life. And other people have even more things to worry about. They're just by simply existing. Sometimes people, have to worry about just simply existing, and that sucks. And, having been diagnosed with autism in the last year, I don't know how things will affect us. I just have been thinking about so many different things. And, whenever I was thinking for a lot of the year that it was pointless to go vote because I just knew how things were going to turn out, I was thinking of Rush's song Freewill, and if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. And so it wasn't the choice that I was trying to avoid, though. I just knew what the outcome was going to be. And I know that going to a polling place and all of that stuff deviates from my routine, and, bright lights and a whole thing that you don't experience but once every 4 years. It can contribute, to the cumulative load of, sensory overload happening. And so, I was thinking of it in that way, but, I still did it just because I felt like it was something important to do. In the context of the book, though, the small man casting a large shadow, that line has kind of been debated amongst readers. And at face value, you initially interpret that to mean Varys is talking to Tyrion. He's just telling Tyrion that despite his small stature, in his position as Hand of the King, he can do a lot of things. He has a lot of power. And that's, because of his mental prowess and everything, that he can do a whole lot with, being a major player in the Game of Thrones in that position. And I thought about that quote, though, so much. And, think about Littlefinger. It could be about him. That could be Varys's cryptic way of warning Tyrion about Littlefinger. And so Littlefinger, Varys says in the show, doesn't care about anything but Littlefinger. And he would see the country burn just so that he could be king of the ashes. And, Littlefinger is selfish and greedy. He doesn't care who he has to manipulate. And he definitely doesn't care whether or not anyone else succeeds. In fact, he's more rooting for people's failure because chaos is a ladder, he says, and he's just using these people as a ladder to ascend in power. And he's, just stepping on them as he's going. And people are getting hurt, killed, whatever. And he doesn't care. And Sansa asks him what he wants. And he says, oh, everything. Well, even if Littlefinger had everything, even if he owned the world, he'd still be an empty shell of a little man and unsatisfied at the end. So it just makes me think about that quote in the sense that it could just be a warning about Littlefinger and his grasping for power. Another way I thought of it, though, since it was stated after the riddle, and the riddle is a king, a septon, and a rich man are in the room with the sellsword. Each bids the sellsword to kill the other two. Who lives, who dies? Initially, Tyrion says it depends on the sellsword. And they debate whether or not it's swordsmen who rule the world. And if they do, then why do they pretend kings have the power? And who was responsible for Ned Stark's death? Was it Joffrey who gave the command? Was it Ilan Payne who swung the sword? Or was it something else? And that's how Varys segues into the power quote. And so power resides where men believe it resides. Cersei, Sansa, Varys, the High Septon, people were trying to stop Joffrey on the stage whenever that happened. But the crowd, the small folk of King's Landing who were present, were calling for his execution. They're there for the spectacle. And Arya, in her perspective in the book, she's hearing all the small folk tell all these exaggerated stories that they've heard, and none of them know the truth. And they're all throwing rocks at Ned and, calling for his execution. And it's just, the King's Landing version of sensationalist news, and, with all the gossip going around. And then they're bored. They need a distraction from their miserable daily lives. So they are rooting for this man to be executed. If they had been crying for mercy instead, maybe Joffrey would have considered that because he'd already had a taste of what an angry mob is like. So the small folk could be the small man that cast a large shadow because he felt encouraged by that crowd to execute Ned. Not that he might not have anyway, but he just wanted any excuse to commit a violent act and or order a violent act be committed. And the small folk of King's Landing also, we've seen how they behaved when Cersei was being marched through the street. And despite your feelings about her, she's still a human. And when you have the entire population of the common folk emptying their chamber pots at you as you're walking by through the streets, paraded through the streets naked, that's a horrible and traumatic thing to happen to anyone. So they also, spoiler alert for House of the Dragon and Fire and Blood, they storm the dragon pit and kill the dragons, a symbol of Targaryen power. And I can't remember it was before or after that they attacked and dismembered the little Targaryen prince. So in large numbers, these common folk that of King's Landing that are, the book's description is like an illiterate group of people, and they have a lot of power in large groups and can, do incredibly vicious things. Why do they always choose to do incredibly vicious and violent things in large numbers? What's behind that? Someone mentioned Plato's cave, applying to that quote, and being somewhat of a cave person myself, I wasn't familiar with it. I looked it up, but I still don't consider myself, enough of an expert on that to talk about it at any length. But I had also thought of Nietzsche, and I always think I'm pronouncing that wrong because I probably am. But, thinking about when lights are dim, shadows grow long. And when you have a lot of people with, who are ignorant of a lot of things, the darkness grows, the shadows grow longer, and, people are afraid of things that they don't understand. They fear things they don't understand, and they get angry about the things that they fear. And it's just a mess. So yeah, I think Varys could have very well have been talking about the small folk when he said a small man can cast a large shadow. And different times throughout both series, it's they're manipulated and used to sway power to this house or that. When they had an opportunity there at the dragon pit, or right after that, they showed that they could have a lot of power in numbers, and that really hurt the Targaryen dynasty. And they could have used that opportunity had they been a little more intelligent and had any kind of organization or plan or anything like that. They might have used that opportunity to better their position. But they keep crying out to the royalty for help when obviously the houses of Westeros all depend on them staying down. Their wealth depends on the poverty of the small folk. Their power depends on the powerlessness of the small folk. And they don't understand that. No matter how many cyclical turns of the wheel happen, they never get it. But, I don't know what George's lessons were, what he intended when he wrote those books. If he had any message, or if he was just, enjoying writing one of the most fascinating, fantastical worlds. But, I think about that in comparison to the real world and think, yeah, a small man can cast a very large shadow, especially when they're making decisions that affect the entire world and the planet. And so that's why I didn't really have any hope the morning that I got up. And I didn't have any hope before the election, but the morning that I woke up the day after the election, I look at my phone and I just go, go about my business, make my coffee, make my breakfast, feed the birds, watch the birds while I'm eating breakfast, and take a shower, go to work. It was just like every other day. I realize if anyone had a reaction video of me, that it would be totally unexciting. But that's because, I didn't expect anything any different. I just, in my mind also, I'm just like, well, I don't I don't recognize that person's power. You know, there's a I don't recognize the authority or respect that person. Um, you know, we could have done just as well with a watery tart handing out swords. I just want to have peace and quiet and to isolate for the next 4 years, I guess. But also, if there are any park ranger positions available in Finland, somebody let me know, because I've heard that they get to rescue metal bands who've gone out for video shoots and gotten stuck. So I think that's my dream job. So anyway, yeah, since that day, I've just kind of done my own thing, listening to Wolfheart over and over, regardless of whether or not I respect the power of that position, or whatever he does in office can have real effects. And I realize that. In my mind, though, I just need to kind of keep my own freedom of mind. And that's the most important thing for everyone right now, is to maintain that autonomy. Because a lot of people, I think, were counting on a president to change things for them. And that's not possible. We have to make changes for ourselves. We have to do things for ourselves and those that we love. So nobody can do that for us. Like, if we want real change in our daily lives, it has to start at the level of the individual. That's my thoughts on power. It resides where we believe it resides, and let's not allow small men with their large shadows to rule our lives. Just remember that power is a shadow on the wall. It's a mummer's trick. And personally, I'm kind of tired of the shadow puppet show.